Well, I think he, yeah, and say thank you. But I think he gave people tired of getting people to pass. We're tired of just hearing talking points. We need to see action. So until that's see what's still in the majority of people's mind was the chief, where they where he just chose Quinlan over Terrence, I think his name is. So they said, like, okay, they feel he was the wrong person. So they still said whatever he does is wrong. So until they start seeing some action, you can just talk all you want. So I think he said the right things, but they're gonna be looking. Said, no, now we need to see some action. Once we start seeing some action, we say, okay, well now maybe it's working.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the things I texted him later after the speech was, you just got to keep it going. I think there's a little bit of a hole that the communication conversation is in, and you've just got to keep it going. And there were a lot of people who were criticizing him online about it and giving their feedback. And I said that's kind of comes with the territory. You got to absorb that and keep continuing to communicate and growing and learning from the conversation. But I know, Bishop Clark, you were very much a part of this conversation behind the scenes, and have really been an advisor in many ways to the administration and to lots of you, as all of you are, quite frankly. But in this particular instance, I know folks have leaned on you, Bishop, for some thoughts. How did you think he did today, the mayor?
Yeah, thanks so much, Commissioner. And let me just say how glad I am to be with you, honored. You know my respect and affection for you and my colleagues on this podcast. Let me speak not so much to the performance of the mayor, but let me speak instead to the potential of what happened today. And that is simply this. Those of us in leadership have what Teddy Roosevelt termed the bully pulpit. And leaders have to be willing to use the power of their office, the bully pulpit, to speak not only to the community, but to cast vision for the community. And one thing every pastor on this panel knows is what you alluded to. Vision leaks. And so you have to constantly cast that vision. And in the beginning, as every pastor on the panel knows, sometimes folk don't get it. I'm not expecting this one speech, as Pastor Lamar said, to change anything. It will have to be consistent, continual, repetitious casting of the vision, and then couple that with action that is measurable. But just like pastoring our churches, that takes time. Good beginning, but you got to use the power of that bully pulpit.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And this is so much bigger than any one thing. Even the incident and the tragedy of George Floyd, while that in itself, I think, sparked off a national response and conversation, racism has been happening in America since the beginning of time. And to unwind that overnight or even in 160 years is nearly impossible. So what can we begin to do? I get asked this question on a daily basis, 10 times a day, and white people say, what can I do to make a difference? Hey, can you talk a little bit about the Black church and what the Black church can do as an institution and moving this conversation along? And then white people in general. I know you've gotten asked that question yourself, probably from your other colleagues. They're saying, what can we do? What can we do? We want to do something. And I'm curious as to what you tell them when they ask you that. So maybe we'll start in reverse order. Bishop Clark?
Sure. I think, and I am waiting to hear the wisdom of my fellow panelists. So let me just quickly say, I think that the history of the Black church or the African American church doesn't have to be defended. And I do grow a little weary. I'm speaking only for myself when persons not in the church persons not versed in the history of the church don't understand it and then attack it. Here is the bottom line. We would not have survived as a people without the African American church. And whether it's Malcolm X or Stokely Carmichael or H. Rap Brown or Angela Davis, those who we consider to be more militant when I was growing up, even they were birthed in the Black church. So nationalism, the civil rights movement, whatever you want to cast it as, it all was birthed in the Black church. And so I think the African American church will simply continue to be what we've always been, the vanguard, the voice, and the place of vigilance for our people. And I don't argue that anymore. I know there are naysayers and scoffers, but if you're realistic and look historically, you'll be hard pressed to find fault with what the church has done for us.
And what are you telling your white counterparts that are calling you and asking me? And are they calling you and asking?
Oh God, yeah. Oh God.
yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I have 4 things that I have said. In fact, I put it in a Facebook post. One of them is give us space for grace. Just back up a little bit. Let us grieve. Let us feel anger. Just step back a little bit. Sometimes in their attempt to want to help, they do too much and they don't allow us grieving space. So that's one thing. There were 3 others, but I won't take time to say them because I want the other brothers to give their wisdom. But for me, that's one of the most important. Just give us space. I think we don't do that. Respect margins. Give us the freedom to work our own grief out, to work through it, knowing that we're not mad at you and we don't distrust you all, but you got to give us some space for grace.
Pastor Lamar, what's your thoughts on that?
Well,
And I'm going to look up while you're doing, I'm looking up a quote that I want to read about this moment. So I'm not paying attention. I'm just looking up this quote, which I got on my phone. I just got to find it, but I'm listening.
well, my thing is, when it comes to me, I tell them, let's go to the root of the problem. That's legislation. So instead of talking to me, talk to your state reps and tell them to change some laws. And the main law that I'm pushing is a law dealing with the prison system. The judicial system is what's been oppressing our communities. People did their time to get out of prison. They got a felony. So that's still keeping them suppressed, oppressed, and depressed. So if you really want to help me, you talk to your state rep and you tell them to introduce some laws. You talk to the governor, you tell them to introduce some laws to change these things. So that's my thing. So, okay, well, where the problem really is, okay, don't give me no more handout. Let's deal with some legislation to deal with these people who got felonies, who's always out here. They want to always bring up their record, but how did they get that record in the first place? So I think if you did your time, there ought to be something in place where your record can get expunged, where you can go on with your life and make a better life.
Sure.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that because this issue of the legislature and the power that exists in the legislative branch to really impact public policy is real. And it's something I want to come back to. I don't know if you all saw that debate they had on the Confederate flag recently in the legislature. And so I want to circle back around that. But real quick before I move on to Pastor Davis, Pastor, what about the Black church? What can the Black church do to accommodate this conversation in the moment that we're in that seems to have everyone's attention?
Who are you talking to?
Yeah, I was asking Pastor Lamar, that just a statement on the Black church too.
The Black, and I think Dr. Clark already shared, Black church can always do what they've already been doing. And that's advocating. Just for me, example, advocating when it comes down to education, not only advocating down at the school board and whatnot, but advocate in the community. So you got to let these parents know that education is important. Like right now, we in this COVID thing, and most of them don't even have computers, don't have Wi-Fi. You got to make sure. The reason why I did my summer camp is because I know that a lot of young kids, and I was strategic in the ones I want to reach, that are not getting educated.
Right.
So we got to push education with them. Then not only we have to push education, but we have to push employment. So we've got to push it from our pulpits. We got to push it among our communities and really just show them, because a lot of them just need to be taken by the hand and show what the things that they need to do instead of saying, listen to them. No, you need to take them by the hand, and then you need to not only take them by the hand, but you need to advocate for them. Because if I send you somewhere and I want them to know that I sent you, or if instead of me bringing somebody down to your office, I'm going to bring you to the community and let the community see, okay, he's coming to our home court and we can begin to speak to him like we need to. So I think the church has to be there to be that advocate for people when it comes down to employment, when it comes down to education, when it comes down to environment. Just like right now, I got a meeting Friday with the land bank, because let's look at the housing crisis. A lot of my people are renting, and instead of putting all this money into helping pay the rent, develop something where they can get an owned and occupied house from the land bank, the city land bank or the county land bank.
Sure. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And the churches are you're seeing more and more involvement outside of the church itself,
right?
In like housing, feeding folks, even employment. And so let me just, to the public that's watching or listening out here, I want to ask you to start a watch party or share our link to get folks on, because we want your questions. They want your questions. This is an opportunity to hear from some of the leading clergy in Central Ohio and ask the questions that you want to ask. So I want to encourage you to share the link and send your questions in. The quote that I was trying to find goes back to something that you were talking about, Bishop Clark, and I'm gonna just read it real quick because I think it has gone off my screen now. Of course, the phone locked up, and so I'm gonna go on to Pastor Davis and have you ask, and I'll find it again. But it's the Black church, and then what are some of your white colleagues saying to you? What are you telling them when they ask you, what can we do?
First of all, the Black church is doing what the Black church has always been, and has been the trumpet of the band. Oftentimes when you're dealing with the orchestra or band, the trumpet carries the main melody that stands out. You can always hear the trumpet's voice. So the church has been the voice. The church is not only continue to be the voice, it's also continue to be the place of resources. We cannot deny the fact that when our people could not go anyplace else to get assistance and direction, the church has been there for them to be that resource place and that direction. The church doesn't have to wave a banner. The church doesn't have to get up and brag about what they're doing. We just do what we've always done. And for many of us, we do it on limited resources. The same resources that pay the taxes of those who are elected. We get what's left over oftentimes because we're a free will offering agency to do what we do and do it the best we can. So that's, first of all, that's what the Black church has been, continues to be, and will be, in addition to what Bishop Clark has already said. What do I say to my white counterparts? I say to them, thank you for your empathy. Thank you for your sympathy and your concern, but this is not a surprise to you. Just take your glasses off, take your shades off, and be observant, and pray for us as we both struggle through this season for America, for the state of Ohio, for Columbus to give an account for what they've always done to this nation. Martin Luther King Jr. said there's a check gone bad. There's a bounce check going around. And the culture has raised up, and they want the money for their check with interest. And that's what I say to my white folk. And I say, anything that you do for us now is retribution, is not a handout or help up, is what you owe us.
Powerful. So let me add, to go back to what you were saying, Bishop Clark. You said you asked them to give us space for grace. And I found this quote the other day, actually someone sent it to me, and I thought it was very powerful. It's by Doug Williford, and it says, and this is about people saying all lives matter over Black lives matter. The quote goes like this: if my wife comes to me in obvious pain and asks, do you love me? An answer of, I love everyone would be truthful, but it's also hurtful and cruel in the moment. If a coworker comes to me upset and says, my father just died, a response of everyone's parents died would be truthful, but hurtful and cruel in the moment. So when a friend speaks up in a time of obvious pain and hurt and says, Black lives matter, a response of all lives matter is truthful, but it's hurtful and cruel in the moment. And I thought that would really capture that conversation, because I think we would all agree all lives do matter, but we're talking about the plight and experience in America of Black people.
401 years.
George Floyd's death, while tragic, has to mean something.
Yes,
and it's time to start a new chapter in American history. And so, Pastor Troy, let me go to you, and then certainly you, Pastor Williams, and then we'll move on. Pastor Troy.
I simply echo what my colleagues have. I mean, we're going to do what we've always done. That didn't change. The pandemic didn't change that. The George Floyd incident didn't change that. We've always had to be there, always doing what we do, meeting daily needs. The whole issue of mental health. Ours is just not from a spiritual point of view, but just helping folks from a mental point of view. The stress and strain of people's life being changed and how quick it pivoted for folks all of a sudden not to be in school, not to be at work. That's major for our folks.
Yeah.
And when you ask me about what do I say to my white colleagues, for me, it's simple. At the basis of this issue is racism is sin. At the end of the day, it's sin. So as a clergy, you have to address the issue of sin. It is sin in your congregation. It's sin in my congregation. So instead of asking us to live with it as those who are the people it gets perpetrated on, then they need to deal with the folk in their congregation who really have carried this thing for 400 years. The real slave bosses, even though they may not be wearing the hoods, they're wearing suits, they're wearing robes, they're wearing corporate 500 dresses, all of those kinds of things. At the end of the day, racism is sin. So if you got the same call I've gotten, I shouldn't have to tell you what to do. Address the issue of sin in your congregation. You can't love me as your brother and then mistreat me or mistreat my kids, whatever else the case may be. So at the end of the day, I hold white clergy far more accountable than anybody else, because the people who are here perpetrating this thing and putting it on our folks, it's like when I'm the victim, then you ask me how to keep you off my neck. I'm the victim. Bruh, talk to the people who are on my neck. So at some point, they have to address that issue, because when we address it, these aren't folks who are sitting in our seats. They're not sitting in our pews. They are sitting in their seats and in their pews. And so the reality of this thing is, it's just like somebody asked me about what I thought about the statues and that kind of stuff. That's nice. But the reality of the day is, those people who are responsible for having this love for the Confederate flag or whatever case may be, you can take the flag down. But until there's transformation in their hearts, until there's a conviction about who God is in their lives, you don't have to fly the flag, because you're still carrying that burden for it. You're still saluting Columbus for it, whatever case may be. So there's got to be some transformation that takes place. And white pastors have to hold accountable their own people in their own congregations.
But you know, Pastor, that applies to everybody, everyday people too. You know, that applies to everyday people. And I would even add that white silence is as much a sin as those who wear robes and do overt things to support racism. White silence is as much a sin, and we need folks, we need our neighbors to stand up and also be a part of this change in this movement.
And Black silence is just as much a sin.
Yeah, I was just trying to answer the question that you asked me. What did I say to my white colleagues?
Pastor Davis, what were you just saying?
I said, and Black silence is just as bad and just as much sin, for many of our Black folk have co-opted into the culture.
A great point. Pastor Williams, let you bring this question home. We'll keep moving. I do have some stuff coming in online. So,
yeah, well, really quick, again, echo the sentiments of everyone who shared thus far. I like that we're bringing up this issue of sin. And I think maybe an even more secular way to say that for the audience out there is, when we talk about sin, we're talking about missing the mark to uphold the moral imperative to speak out against injustice across whatever spectrum it is, whether it's ideological, theological, political, philosophical, however you name it. We have a responsibility to call wrong, wrong, and to speak up. And so I feel that that's one of the things that the church brings to the table. All throughout the civil rights movement, the church led the way, and we gave voice, articulation to the issue of morality. And I was reminded again, how can we have a conversation about the Black male without a few Dr. King quotes? So I was reminded of this quote from Dr. King. He said, "The genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus." And so I think that's the call for us really as the Black church, as body of Christ in this community, is to not just search for what is popular, but to mold that consensus. And I guess real quickly, one of the things that we can do going forward, I saw a question there in the chat box, was what can we do going forward? I think the real question is not what have we done in the past, but going forward, we must collaborate. So I guess I'll close up my comments with that even these wonderful leaders who've been in this community longer than I've been alive, in order for us to
It's at least two of them. It's at least two of them.
That's scary.
But
That's
we gotta
scary.
work. We gotta work together. I don't think anybody can pull it off on their own. And I pastor obviously a lot of younger people, and there is a lot of hunger in their hearts to be involved and to get engaged. But there is a vacuum that I feel that the church has to fill, and we can do that in solidarity.
And you hit the nail on the head, and you actually answered one of the questions that did come online that I was asking. So I see you're doing both. See, that's the power of a younger generation. He's got this on and his Facebook. I can't even do that. So that's impressive. But one of the things as an elected official, and I feel like pastors are very much in the same realm too. There is no magic wand. There's no button that we can push and make all this go away. And at the end of the day, you can't legislate morality. Change starts with people and individuals and digging into their hearts and their minds. And then time has to occur. America experienced slavery for a far longer time span than we've experienced no slavery. And so we're still dealing with the elements of the culture that were started in slavery. And so I just think that, we're in this environment where people are responding, the masses are talking, but we as leaders, and whether you're elected leader or you're leading a church institution, we're in a tough position because people expect something. They expect something. So one of the questions that came in, and let me give a quick shout out to some of the folks watching. I know Keena Smith, our deputy administrator for Franklin County, is on watching, and Nathaniel Jordan is also watching. Thank you. And State Representative Tom West, representing Canton, is watching. And then I just got this note: Congresswoman Beatty is watching. You know you have arrived when the Congresswoman takes time out of her day and is watching. So I want to thank Congresswoman Beatty. She's watching it from her Pieces Wear team store. So thank you for joining us, Congresswoman. Columbus Black is also watching us and supporting us. And I think there are members and staff, many people from the Board of Commissioners. But let me just dig into this question of the church, because you all take as much criticism as pastors, as elected officials. It just don't always play out in the newspaper and the news on social media. But you all, my church to your church, everybody always got something to say. Always got something to say. As we try to get to a new chapter for Central Ohio, at least, what should we be saying to the naysayers, the folks? Let me just add on to this real quick. Somebody brought up the legislature. Just last week, just a week or so ago, they were debating on whether or not Confederate flags can be flown on state fair and county fair grounds, and if we should ban them. And the Republicans argued that it's a free speech thing. And the Democrats argued it is a symbol of hate and divisiveness, and that it should be banned. And it was, and they got technical because they said it was a treasonous act to declare and secede from the Union and create this new country, if you will. And they went to war over it. And so, there are those who say, and again, I'm getting back to the critics question, because there are those who want to say you're not doing enough, or you're saying too much and doing too much. What do you say to folks that argue for things like, the Confederate flag and things that are divisive. And how do you respond as a pastor to that kind of conversation when it comes your way? Who wants to start? Anybody, just take the question.
Yeah. Let me just jump in. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Fred.
No, go ahead. Because I was just going to say, Dr. Choi already hit it, because Dr. Choi said until you change the hearts of the people, you can fly whatever you want to, but until their hearts is changed, it ain't gonna make no difference.
Yeah, I agree. Let me just take it a little bit further, because this nauseates me because of the hypocrisy that's involved in it. You're absolutely right. We declared war on Germany. We had a war in Vietnam. We had the Korean conflict. And I don't know any place where those flags are flown as a sign of acceptance. It would be considered, to use the president's term, treasonous to do that. All right, so I don't understand how we can make room for a people who seceded, formed a country, had a president, had a capital in Richmond, Virginia, and declared war against us and robbed us of millions of our young men in the Civil War, and it's all right to raise their flag. Now, and here's where I get nauseated. These same persons who find the ability to cover the Confederate flag had a hissy fit when former President Obama, and I didn't agree with it, but when he lit the White House in the colors of the gay rights movement, when the Supreme Court made that decision, and they went ballistic. I don't understand how some colors bother you, the rainbow bothers you, but the Confederate flag doesn't. That hypocrisy grates my nerves. And it is such an affront to history, to sensibility, and to decency.
Anybody else want to comment?
And the church say amen.
You know, and I guess, and I agree with my colleague. And for me, it's not even an issue about the Confederate flag or whatever represents that history. I think, especially as Black church leaders, what we've got to do is emphasize our own independence even more in terms of patronizing our own businesses, making sure we're holding folks who, when people come to our churches, what is our agenda? And how do we hold them accountable? So when elected officials come to church, it's got to be more than an op situation. How have they voted? What legislation? I mean, this has got to get back into accountability, saying, ladies and gentlemen, we're no longer open season for visitation. If you're coming to visit, then here's the agenda. If you're not willing to address the agenda, be the Black, white, or whatever the case may be, it's a new day in the house.
Right.
Terms, and especially from an economic point of view, I'm excited about the new things that's out on the web about different Black businesses in Columbus. I had no idea many.
Yes.
I said to my administration, we need to look at the vendors we're using and how can we replace some of those folks with folks who look like us. We've got to determine our own economic success and put it on everybody else to do that. And to go back to Bishop Clark's thing, you can't tell me that we could fly the Nazi flag in Bexley.
Do it.
End of my discussion.
End of the story. End of the story. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it.
Get a chance, watch the debate on the Ohio channel. And that's for the watchers, the listeners too. Watch the debate in the Ohio House, their last day of session, which I think was June 11th or something like that. Watch the debate. It's worth listening to, because what you hear is the real sort of open opinion about this conversation about racism. And it's in a sophisticated way under the guise of a legislative action. And so, I mean, I think it's the real divisive line in the room. Anybody else want to comment on that before I go to?
I think the church, I think the church also has a responsibility. I mean, the church has been the moral conscience of America, but we also have a responsibility to educate our people on the legislative system and the policies and procedures so that we will know how to respond. Just in your recommendation to listen to that interchange of the arguments that are going on the House floor right now. Many of our, especially our younger generation, we've not pushed them to listen and learn and be a part of that. I think when I came along, it was called civics. That process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Pastor Williams, you want to comment on this at all?
I think everyone's hit the nail on the head. I think, I mean, on one level, it just is absolutely idiotic that we would think it's okay to fly a Confederate flag. And that's my simple response to it. It's just idiotic.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, I think change is coming, but it goes back to, I think, what Pastor Lamar said, and that's the real action, the real opportunity is on election day. If we can show up on election day, not just this election in 2020, this one's critical, but not just this one, but every year. Election is every November. And if we show up, then we can start to change the narrative. It's going to take some time, but we can change that narrative. With that, I know you've all seen this declaration that Franklin County did as declaring racism as a public health crisis. And we were one of the first counties in America to do it. And we've been steeped in this conversation around poverty reduction and the elimination of racism for the last 2 years. And I want to credit my colleagues, John O'Grady and Marilyn Brown, who have been just tremendous to work with and fully committed to this conversation. But tell me about your thoughts on this. Before the pandemic, there was another pandemic, and that's racism. African Americans has disparate numbers in hypertension, diabetes, high blood pressure, and other chronic illnesses. Tell me what your thoughts about this declaration, because now you're seeing it all over the country, cities and counties, all the large counties in Ohio, many counties and cities across Ohio, but across the country, probably no less than 60 or 70 have called me personally and asked for my guidance and help. And so you're starting to see a movement. So tell me what your thoughts about this, the declaration really mean and the impact of it potentially.
Before anybody answers, let all of us say, we applaud you. You were gracious, honoring and acknowledging your fellow commissioners, but you ran the ball on that. That's your brainchild, and you've been at it for years. So I'm not answering. I just want to set it right, frame it well. That's you, and you're to be commended for that, because that was all you.
Thanks, but I got to give my colleagues. They've been right here, and
yes,
and I got to tell you, it's refreshing to be in an environment where your colleagues respond. We declared, we canceled Columbus Day as a paid holiday, and put Juneteenth in its place as a paid holiday for our employees. And we talked about it as a commission, and it was done an hour later. And that's the kind of environment I think we're in with my colleagues. And so I want to share all of the love and credit with them, because they're working hard on this issue too.
And we have three great commissioners, and we applaud them. But it was your vigilance, and I appreciate both of them standing with you. But I think you give credit where credit is due as well.
Yeah. And we agree with Bishop Clark, but just like, the comment you just said, which is not just a comment, it's a fact. You said the discussion occurred and an hour later, change occurred.
There you go.
The discussion occurred, an hour later, a vote was taken, change occurred. I'm gonna say it one more time so we can get it. The discussion occurred, an hour later, change occurred. That's what these kids are marching about. That's what people are arguing about. A discussion, yes, but when is change going to occur? So yeah, we've declared that racism is a national pandemic, is a health threat. Where's the money to subside that or change that? That's my question. What are we going to do now? We waved the banner, we've declared it, we've got the plaque on the wall. Now what we going to do? Where is the money to help change all of those things that are in place to make a difference in the lives of those who look like me and you?
Let me push Dr. Davis's point a little further. What is it going to look like? we heard the statement, but how does that impact the day-to-day lives of folk who are brown and black in this community from a health point of view? And so it's a great declaration. My grandfather used to say the weakness of the church is we got to learn to put feet on prayers. So how do we get finished with the declaration and it become a reality in people's lives that we serve? Just like Brother Lamar was saying about those kids down that he's serving, the kids in Linden, whatever case may be. When I realized that I've got kids at a school that when they eat on Friday, they may not get another good meal.
Right.
You know,
Right.
how in God's name does that happen? And so as a church, we decided, okay, we got to take care of the meals during the weekend. So as much as that declaration happened, where does this become embodied in the change in our community? Just like infant mortality, you know, all in this day and time with the kind of hospitals we've got in Columbus, it is a sin and a shame that we've got the infant mortality issue we've got inside the city limits. So at some point, that's got to become a reality so we can point to that and say, here's how we made a difference in people's lives. And we got to be able to qualify that.
Anybody else want to respond?
Yeah, but I think I responded when I was on the call when you declared it, and I applaud you for it, and I likewise applaud your colleagues because it's going to take us locking arms, everyone seeing this as a crisis. But the comment that I gave then, you know, going back to Obama, when Obama said, "My brother's keeper," you know, we got all these initiatives coming out, but then they come out, they go through the study, and then they fizzle down, and then it kind of like dies off, you know. So while yes, it is a health crisis, I'm just watching to say, okay, so what we doing now, and making sure that we got oversight in the things that we're trying to do and get done.
Yeah. Commissioner Boyce, if I could even ask a question, are there any plans underway, I guess, to translate that resolution into action? And if so, what is the role of the church in that? Or is that yet to be discovered?
See, I told you, young folk want action.
Wait a minute, Pastor Williams. I asked the questions over here.
I told you. I tried to warn you, Kevin. I tried to warn you. I tried to warn you.
You did warn me. You did. Look, I should have muted him. I got a button where I could mute him when he was talking. We can't hear you.
You declared it. It was an hour later. Now what?
Well, let me say this before he answers, because I want to be sure we are using the right nomenclature. What was done by our county commissioners, all three of them, and I love all three of them. I count them personal friends. What was done by city council was about mental health. And I want us to be very clear about nomenclature. It is what racism does to the psyche and the image and the perception of African-American people. It dates back to the Kenneth B. Clark test with the dolls, one white doll, one black doll, given to young black girls, late 50s, early 60s. And inevitably, black girls chose the white doll because in their mind, the white doll was prettier. I've had people tell me when they bought their child, their first black doll, the child cried because they wanted a white doll. That's mental health. It's what racism does to our mindset. So it isn't whether or not, now it does affect hypertension and all of that, but that's the result of the stress and strain of mental health. So I want to be sure we're all saying the same thing.
And because what you said, Bishop Clark, is not what's understood by the masses. They don't understand it's a mental health issue. When we declare racism a health issue, they're looking at all those other tentacles that outbranch from racism.
Sure. County Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So I was trying to look up we were very intentional about including in our resolution action items, and that we didn't because, my position on this and perspective was it's easy to declare, to do a resolution,
right?
Easy to pass that, and it's easy to just kind of make the statement, and that in itself is valuable because it also spurred additional declarations that get the country and get our state talking about it in the right way based on facts and information. But we were very careful to include action items in our own. And we embedded in the resolution 10 action items that the county could be held accountable for and responsible for. And I'll just read a couple of them. And I they should be on our website. And so if our listeners or viewers want to see them, you can. And I got the wrong resolution up. I'm looking at it now. This is the engineer's resolution. That's not mine. Hold on. Somebody, my staff will text it to me here shortly. But the point is that we were very deliberate about that. But even more than that, Pastor, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Mm-hmm. What people missed about our declaration was we spent a year, 2018, meeting and looking at this issue of poverty and what we found in meeting for over a year. And again, I'll give my colleagues the credit. We met in all those meetings and we required ourselves to be there the whole time. And each meeting was all day. And so you couldn't take no phone calls, couldn't take no conference calls or meetings. You had to sit there and deal with this all day. But what we found in it, they're texting me now, hopefully they got it. Here we go. What we found in it was the underlying issue for a lack of affordable housing, access to quality education, access to good employment, wealth distribution was racism. And so, and when you couple that with the mental health aspect that was just being talked about, there was a feeling that we can, by taking these actions and declaring this action, we can begin to dig in and peel and drill down on some of these action items. So let me just read a couple that we declared. And again, I want the public to get this resolution and hold us accountable. If we're not addressing these things as we go forward after declaring this, then shame on us, and we should be held accountable in the worst ways. So as far as I'm concerned, and yeah, you can quote me on that. I know somebody will out there, but
yes.
So the first one is assert that racism is a public health crisis affecting our entire county. That's the first part. The second one was work to progress to progress as equity and justice-oriented organizations. With the Board of Commissioners, its staff, leadership continue to identify specific activities to further enhance diversity and anti-racism principles across the Board of Commissioners leadership. And it goes on, and I won't get into it because people want to hear from you all, not me. The point is, we felt very strong that we couldn't just declare it without putting some items in that hold us accountable. Let me just give a shout out to Dontavius Jarrell, who's watching. Dontavius is going to be the next state rep for the 25th House District. It appears. Right. Glad he's paying attention and listening to our clergy leadership in Central Ohio. I've gotten this question several times, and I'm sure Pastor Williams has seen this a couple of times, but everyone keeps asking the question, what's next? You know, what's next for Franklin County? What's next for the city of Columbus? What's next for the Black church? So we've got about 9 minutes, and I'll just open the floor up. What's next? What should the Franklin County be thinking about? What should the Black church be thinking about? What should the city be thinking about? And what are your church? What are you going to be thinking about as a church? All right, I'm gonna call you like
acquiesce to our elder, Pastor Troy.
It's getting rough in here today.
He's wearing that out. He's just wearing that out.
You know, Vic, I live within walking distance of Victor. I will deal with him after this is over with.
No, that's right.
And 24 years ago, Brian, I was in your shoes, so I'm loving this. I was a young kid.
For me, and I've had this discussion more times than I want to think about. I think what we have to realize is that this has to be approached at multiple levels. For me, my concept is, what's the long game? You know, what kind of changes do we have to make? And they've got to be made on all different levels. There are those who they're passionate about protesting. But if you go back and look at the civil rights movement, and King and Abernathy and them get a lot of credit for being out front, but people forget about the people in the back rooms.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The people who were raising the money, the people who were doing all. And so we've got to approach this more than just the folk we see out front. Everybody has a role to play, and I think we got to let people play their roles and find their niche and do what they're capable of doing. Nobody's going to beat Fred Lamar being in the streets in the South End. I mean, nobody. I don't care who it is. And I always applaud him for that. But that's not everybody's passion. We've all got to approach this in our own bailiwick and do what we do. Where's the strategic thinking going on that says, as Fred raised a question, how do we keep this from being just another declaration? What's the long game? What does it need to look like? What are the benchmarks? What are the milestones? I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but probably the first immediate thing for most of us is, what does opening our churches back up look like? Because that's no easy ploy for many of us in terms of those kind of things, and the safety of our members, let alone the folks who are out there in the community. And so we're being called on to do a whole lot more than we're doing. So it's just not Sunday morning for us. We're feeding community, we're feeding folks, we're getting masks, we're doing COVID testing. We're literally become a social service agency besides what we do on Sunday morning. So for me, it's about meeting the needs that show up at New Salem and in the community that we serve.
Man, that was spot on. And I'm going to say, since Congresswoman Beatty is watching, in the spirit of Congress, somebody's going to have to yield some time because we only got so many minutes left. But I'm going to let you, can a couple of more of you comment on that? What's next for Central Ohio?
My thing is, I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing, advocating for the least, the last, and the lost, just continue the housing thing, continue to be there and letting people know. So look, I'm here for you. So whatever you need, I'm going to walk with you to make sure you get it, and just encourage them in that respect.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bishop.
No, please.
I'll be very brief. I'll yield my time since I'm the only one under 35 on here.
Oh, wow.
Ouch.
I do remember when he was born, when his mother was carrying him.
Oh, man.
I do remember it.
And the frightening thing is, both Clark and I have kids his age. That's
Well, I think real quickly, I think the word that kind of comes to mind with regard to what do we do next is solidarity, but not just in thought or in word, but in action. I think the church is a sleeping giant in that regard, that if we work together, everyone is doing great work in their part of town, and we have to kind of keep that up. But I do see there's a lot of potential for us to collaborate on some of these projects, even partnering with the city or the county. And so I think really going forward, that is probably going to be the number one and most important thing, is collaboration.
Right. I echo that. It's what Dr. King said in, I think, his last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Community or Chaos? And it's like that story of the little boy with the bird in his hand who asked the preacher, is the bird dead or alive? And his thought was, if he says it's alive, I'll crush it. If he says it's dead, I'll open my hand, it'll fly out, but I'll trap the old preacher. And so the little boy said, Reverend, you always talk about everything you know. Is this bird dead or alive? And the preacher said, son, seems to me that's in your hands. And I think where we go from here is in the hands not only of those of us on this panel, but it certainly is in the hands of this next generation. And I hope we lean towards community in its fullest sense of the word. I tell you what, if we don't, it's going to be chaos. The choice will be made for us.
Yeah, Bishop, I just love that comment about it's in your hands,
Right.
because that's really what this conversation is about. It's really about giving an opportunity for Central Ohioans to be a part of what that new chapter looks like.
Yep.
And some of it's discussion, some of it is activism, and some of it is other kinds of ways to contribute. The way that everybody can participate right now is through the census. This year, we are in our, that decennial year of where we are by the United States Constitution required to take a census, a count of the people. And it doesn't mean citizens, it means residents, a count of the people. And so if you haven't done your 2020 census, you can go to 2020census.gov and fill out the form. It's 10 questions, takes less than 10 minutes. Took me about 2 or 3 minutes because questions aren't really that complicated, but you can get through it very quickly. You can also call 844-330-2020. That's 844-330-2020. But now, as pastors, in many ways, you run, it's a nonprofit, but it's kind of a business. It's an institution. And you're dealing with money sometimes from the federal government, from the government. Sometimes you're dealing with money from the community. Sometimes you're dealing with your own investments and enterprises and things like that. But in a few words, tell me, how important is it for your members of your congregation in this community to be counted in the census? And I'll just let anybody jump out.
If we're not counted, we don't receive the benefits. I heard one community leader said that data is dollars. So if we're not counted, even though there are those of us who are of color who don't trust the system, there are those of us who can certify that the system does work. So if we're not counted, we don't receive dollars. Bottom line, it's economics.
And not just that, the information determines representation. We wouldn't have our tremendously gifted, strong Congresswoman if we don't count. So if the information's not there, then the representation is not there. So data and dollars, information, representation, it matters more than we realize.
Bandwagon for a second too, Bishop. One, let me give a shout out to our administrator, Ken Wilson, who's watching.
Yes.
You know, Ken does a lot to make sure the dots are connected here. And so that's great. But to your point about Congresswoman Beatty, that seat was actually created from the last census.
That's my point.
Before that, Central Ohio never even had a seat in Congress because the way it was divided. It was divided between the suburbs and then Columbus was divided. So our representatives were more suburban representatives, and her seat is the first City of Columbus congressional seat. Sir. And by the way, it's what's referred to as a minority influence seat, which means that there are enough minorities in that seat to influence the outcome of that seat. And that's critical and important. And so this census, we're competing with states like North Carolina and Georgia because we could possibly lose a seat. We could possibly lose a seat. And so it's just critical that we get counted. Anybody else want to add anything about the census? I know, Pastor Lamar, you got so many programs. I know you've got to know about the census and some of the work you're doing.
Yeah. We just sharing, I mean, we've got a event this Saturday, a census open community event. We make sure people register to vote, and we always do it the last weekend following Father's Day. So we making sure they register to vote and making sure that counting the census. But one thing that I want to bring up about the census is the fact that whereas on those in the prison system get counted in the county that they in prison at instead of the zip code where they come from. So if I've got a 2 to 10 year sentence and I'm gonna get counted in that county, whether it's Marion County, whether it's Bill County, I'm getting counted there. So then when I get released, the county where I'm released to, the money's not there. It's where I was sentenced at. So I think there ought to be some legislation changes to where there's some change done with that.
That's good. That's good.
I will push back a little bit on that, Pastor, because I'll tell you that when they are here in the county, we pay for so much because oftentimes if someone's charged with, say, a federal crime, sometimes they will sit in our correctional institution and we have to cover the cost. And so I think there's a balance somewhere in that, though. I think that there's something to be done, to be adjusted. But the counties like Franklin County, we're always struggling to recover dollars like that.
No, I'm talking about prisons. Because in the
jails count the same, though. The jails count the same, though. Like, so because we host the county is required to host the jail. So you're right. You're right on the prisons part too. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Any other comments on the census? Anything that we can do?
No, I'm in agreement with my colleagues. This is a no-brainer. I mean, it's not an option. We just got to do it. People understand the implications if we don't do it.
Well, I want to say to you, gentlemen, it's a pleasure to know all of you. I honestly, you're all mentors, brothers and fathers, and friends to me. And I just can't tell you the influence that you've had on my life. I can't put it in words. And I know, Pastor Williams, you're younger than me. But I will say you're doing tremendous things at your church.
Yes, sir.
People talk about you in the community all the time and the great things you're doing at your church. And so I'm just so honored that you took time out of your day to spend it with me and Central Ohio. And I'm very hopeful that our public watching today enjoyed the conversation. I hope you'll join me back here at the same time, same place next week, 3:00 on Wednesday, to talk more about the impact of wealth, health, and race in Central Ohio. Thanks for joining us today, everybody.
Appreciate you, man.
We thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for calling us together. Be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.